This week on Newsmakers, John Kline, Republican of Minnesota and chairman of the Education and the Workforce Committee. Sir, thank you for joining us.
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Two reporters to help with questions. Fawn Johnson, National Journal congressional reporter, and Derek Wallbank, congressional reporter with Bloomberg News. And Derek has the first question.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, on July 1st, if Congress doesn't act, subsidized Stafford loans double from 3.4 to 6.8%. For millions of students and recent alumni who are still paying them off. I'm wondering, do you see a way with the House and the Senate still not having figured out how to come together on something? Do you see a way that doubling gets averted before July 1?
I think it's important to note that when you say Congress needs to act, that the House has acted. The House passed legislation to avert that doubling on July 1st. I think it's very solid legislation. It was very much in keeping with what the President of the United States had proposed, and that is to get away from politicians deciding what that interest rate ought to be every year or two, tie it to the market, use the 10-year Treasury. That's what the White House proposed. That's what we have in our language. So we think it's a very good proposal. It prevents the doubling. It is a long-term solution, and the House has passed it. So, to get to your question, what has to happen? The Senate needs to pass something. The Senate tried two bills. One was the Senate Republican bill, which was to use the 10-year Treasury as well, use a different percentage. It failed. And then the House Democrats, Mr. Harkin, had a bill that would have just kicked the can for 2 more years, kept it 3.4, used some taxes to pay for it. And I don't think that's the right solution. In fact, when the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, was for the committee testifying, he was asked by Republicans and Democrats what he thought we ought to do, and he said long-term solution, use the market. When one of my Democrat colleagues said, well, wouldn't it be better to just have a temporary 2-year solution? He said no. He thought it was time for a permanent solution. He didn't think it'd be that hard to do. So now discussions are, I understand, bubbling around a little bit. I talked to Senator Alexander yesterday or day before, sort of forgot what day of the week it is right now. He is trying to continue discussions with the White House, because what we need here is a little presidential leadership to say, look, we propose a long-term solution, interest rates tied to the market, 10-year Treasury. Why don't we push the Senate to pass some version of that, and then we can hammer out the details between the House and Senate?
I think if you can talk a little bit about the politics of this, that would be helpful, because I remember last year when this issue came up in January and February, emailing Alexandra and asking you what you thought, because we all knew the interest rate hike was coming. And if I remember right, you weren't particularly interested in doing much. You did have some ideas about ways that could be fixed, and it wasn't until Mitt Romney came forward and said, we can't let this happen because of the economy, that the entire issue kind of blew up. And how can you find agreement when it's clear that there are political points to be had for keeping your own side?
Well, there are also political points to be had, I would think, for having a success here. I'm a little bit surprised that the White House hasn't recognized how similar the proposals are and said, let's get this done and have a bipartisan victory and take an issue and move it off the table. I'm still hopeful that we can do that, because the Senate hasn't been successful in their short-term 3.4% for 2 years solution and find some way to pay for it, taxes, that we can come together for a long-term solution. That's the direction that we're continuing to work for. My discussions with Senator Alexander, the Senate Republicans, are very much committed to that approach. And again, it should not be that difficult to do, considering the White House's on-paper position. In his budget, he has a proposal. So I think there's still room. It's early June. That's
well, according to the National Journal, the administration has objected to your bill because it's, quote, the largest interest rate increases on low, middle-income students and families who struggle most to afford a college education.
Well, I do find that interesting that the White House has taken that proposal when they also propose that we tie the interest rates to the market. and to the same market instrument, the 10-year Treasury. That Treasury can move up and down, markets do. We very carefully put in caps in case you get a market climate where the interest rates are rising very rapidly. The president does not do that. And I think when you say something like this is going to be the largest rise or this is going to be a rise, that says that you are predicting with some certainty what the market is going to do. I would argue they don't know what the market.
Let's just look at it right now. The 10-year Treasury right now is about what, 2.2%. So give or take some flex in there. Under your plan, rates would go to 4.7, somewhere around there. Under the president's plan, rates would go actually down a little bit to about 3.1 for this next lending year. What's the reason to increase rates right now on those subsidized Stafford loans?
Well, by law, those rates go to 6.8% on July 1st.
Current policy, and we had that current law, current policy debate during the fiscal cliff. But under current policy, I guess it would. It still would go up to there. So what's the reason that it would be a good idea to increase those rates now?
So we're splitting hairs here, but the law says that on July 1st, those rates go to 6.8%. The law already has the non-subsidized Stafford rates at 6.8%. They're already there. In our proposal, we bring those rates down because we combine the two. And since most students, or many students, I think it's a slight majority of students who have the subsidized Stafford loans also have the unsubsidized Stafford loans, we're in effect bringing those down for students. We're also addressing the issue of the graduate plus loans and the parent loans and bringing that down as well. We just think that the long-term solution, using the market, not having this kind of back and forth political debate every year or two is the right way to go. And even those who are proposing doing this for 2 years recognize that we're either going to have another political debate in 2 years or they're going to have a long-term solution. My position is we put forward one, it's a good one, it's solid. The president put forward one that also ties it to the market, uses the 10-year Treasury and makes it a long-term solution. The ingredients are there to be able to come together and iron out whatever differences might be.
Do you have any sympathy for Democrats, and I'm referring specifically to Tom Harkin of Iowa, the senator who is your counterpart in the Senate? He was making comments last week when there was rallies about these student loan issues that he was not that sure that the president's idea in terms of tying interest rates to the market was all that helpful. And he said that's a big change. That's something we need to think about, and I would like to take the time to explore it in a broader context. And I know that Democrats in the House have said the same thing. Any reason to understand that?
This issue has been in front of us for a long time. I understand it's June now, and July 1st is coming rapidly, but this is not a new idea. As we just discussed earlier, we started to have this discussion last year. We, at that time, were trying to move towards a long-term solution where we tied the interest rates to the market. Politics jumped in there, and the decision was made to take the interest rate and keep it for the subsidized Stafford only at 3.4%. And by the way, neither the president nor his challenger, in saying that we ought to keep it at 3.4%, made any suggestion about what was going to happen this July 1st when it came up again, nor about how they were going to pay for it. And that 1 year fix was over $6 billion. So we have an obligation not just to students and to graduates, but to taxpayers. We have to look at huge deficits we've been running, and what the debt is, and there needs to be a trade-off. The markets provide a much more accurate reflection of the value cost of capital than we do every election year.
Do you see then, because the House plan is a market-tied situation and because the President's plan is a market-tied situation, really we're looking at a difference between rates between those two plans. There's some other things around the edges, but it's right. The core thing is on rates. Do you see a window for compromise there that you don't necessarily see with the Senate Democratic straight extension?
No, I think that's exactly fair, because the President has proposed a long-term solution tied to the market. We've proposed a long-term solution tied to the market. The interest that you add to the 10-year Treasury differs, and the formulation differs a little bit. The President would like to have it vary than fix it each year. Ours varies each year, but then you're allowed to consolidate them and fix them. The president's, some have argued, it gives more certainty to students. On the other hand, fixed is fixed. So once you've got it, you don't have a chance to take advantage of the markets after you graduate and consolidate and fix those loans. So, but I think those are exactly the kinds of things that we ought to be having a discussion, a debate, if you will, right now in a conference committee or face-to-face, instead of the situation where the president proposes a long-term solution and then comes out and frankly vilifies our long-term solution and says he wants a short-term solution, after his Secretary of Education said no, he wants a long-term solution. So it's an interesting sort of conundrum that's out there, but I still think the pieces are there that we could come together and have a long-term solution with interest rates determined by the market.
Can you talk a little bit about how it was that your proposal in the House that has passed makes money for the Treasury? Was that intentional? I mean, that's something that Democrats have seized on as one of its problems.
Well, Fawn, as you know, we are, I almost said driven by, but we certainly are influenced and to some extent controlled by what the Congressional Budget Office says any legislative proposal costs or makes. And so our effort was to try to keep this legislation as close to budget neutral as we could get it. And that turns out to be fairly difficult because you got to look at 1 year, 5 year, 10 years under the legislation, under House rules, under cut-go. And we came up with a bill that keeps that line very, very flat. At the end of 10 years, according to the Congressional Budget Office, and even the Congressional Budget Office would tell you, and probably without a moment's hesitation, that their projection for 10 years is not going to be what it's going to be. But we saved for the Treasury $3.7 billion. The president's proposal saves 3.1. In a 10-year projection, that's the same. And that's the argument that we've been making. Look, we think our bill is better. We like our approach better, but we are perfectly willing to speak with the Senate if they can pass some legislation, and we'll see if we can't work out a compromise.
Democrats have said that could be resolved, this issue, if you would just agree to language in your bill that says any revenue would be going toward preserving Pell Grants.
I don't know where you heard that. I don't think that that's a true statement, that would resolve it. If that's what they think, then let's let the Senate pass some legislation to that effect, and we'll see if we can come to an agreement.
Well, this is from the Center for American Progress, a Democratic group.
Was that Mr. Miller? Is that Mr. Harkin? Who is who?
Right.
So you see, my point is,
right.
It's interesting what people have to say about this. Let's see some legislation that can pass the Senate, and then we have the pieces necessary to come together and work out a compromise. But the notion, and I heard this just today, that there are some Democrats in the House want us to forget about the fact that we passed a bill and pass another bill. No, that doesn't make any sense. So I start negotiating with myself over what this thing should look like? No.
Mr. Kline, the whole student loan issue really does get at the question of affording college.
Right.
The whole goal here is to get more folks to go to college. And I'm wondering, in your state, the new president of the University of Minnesota has talked about administrative bloat in the University of Minnesota system. Mitch Daniels, former governor of Indiana, now at Purdue, has talked about the same thing. How much of this situation is on universities and needing to take a harder look in the mirror at how much they pay their own administrators and contribute to the cost of higher education?
It's a terrific question because you're getting right at the issue. It's the actual cost of going to school. And so in some cases it may be administrative, in some cases it may be issues of how much faculty you have. Do you have too much faculty? Every institution needs to look at its operating costs and determine how competitive they want to be, because we're getting to the point where the costs in tuition and fees and books and all of those things is getting so high that you're starting to see other forms of competition pop up. And I go immediately to online education, where you have an incredible range of ideas out there these massive online courses that are the MOOCs that have come up that are effectively free. You've got schools, including long-standing universities and colleges that are starting to offer some of their courses online. A lot of community colleges are offering some of their courses online. You have some colleges, including, I think it's the University of Texas now, that is offering textbooks available to other schools. My point is that there is a recognition, I think now, and I was just out at the University of Minnesota just a couple of months ago visiting with the president and with others, and they're recognizing that they have allowed some legacy costs to build up. They've got a lot of redundancy. They have things that they have to clean up, and there is a recognition that there is competition out there. All of those are very, very healthy in trying to keep those costs down.
Is there any of those things that you mentioned or other things that you can add into the Higher Education Act, which is up for reauthorization,
Yes, it is.
to address the broader issue of college costs? Because I always feel like the student loan debate is really just talking about a very small piece of a much bigger problem.
No, you're exactly right, Fawn. The student loan debate is very hot right now because July 1st is rapidly approaching us, and we're looking at that doubling of the rates on the subsidized Stafford loans. We've left out a giant chunk is the right word, a very, very big piece of student loans that are not even addressed by this 3.4 to 6.8 issue. The real issue, as Derek was saying, I think, is this overall cost of higher education. And so there are a lot of things that we're talking about addressing that. One of those is the need for transparency, more information for students and parents about what the education is going to cost and what they're going to get for it. We passed a little bill under suspension, very bipartisan bill, directing in the House, directing the Secretary of Education to put together a panel and come back and tell us what is useful information and is it practical to use it? Does it address privacy concerns? Is it creating a huge burden on the colleges and universities if you have to provide this information? But the more students and parents of students know about what it costs and what they can expect to get out of it, I think the better decisions they can make. And that's back to the competition piece that I brought earlier. If they see that they can go to, we'll just call it College X, for $7,000 a year, and they have an 80% expectation of getting a job, where going to College Y is $25,000 a year and there's a 50% expectation, these decisions start to get a lot easier. So we are looking at that. There's no question that'll be part of the Higher Education Act reauthorization. What it's exactly going to say, I don't know. We've already started having some hearings addressing these issues. There was a subcommittee hearing today talking about accreditation, and there are a lot of questions and challenges about how that works. And does that really give you the kind of information that you need to make these decisions? And some testimony that said no.
When can our viewers expect that legislation would come to the floor?
The Higher Education Act?
Right.
Oh, certainly not until next year. I mean, we're starting very early in the process. As I mentioned, we already started having hearings on it. We'll probably start getting into it in the fall, but I wouldn't expect that we would really get into it until 2014. We have other issues that will be up a lot sooner, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which will be in committee for markup for amendment next week and will be on the floor in July. So we have, and student loans are still being discussed.
Actually, we should probably talk about that.
Yeah, we have a little bit more than 5 minutes left, so go ahead, Fawn.
We're going to switch slightly topics. But it is the ESEA, otherwise known as No Child Left Behind,
Exactly.
up for reauthorization.
Right.
The Senate committee has also been considering legislation,
Right.
but the Republicans and Democrats on that committee are very far apart to
Right.
the point where they can't even they have competing bills.
Right.
And the Senator Lamar Alexander, who is the ranking Republican on that committee, has said that your bill is going to be the one that saves them, as Republicans. So I want to know, A, if he's right. Is that the bill that they have proposed does away with a lot of federal standards for states, and B, do you think that there's any chance that there's a way the Republicans and Democrats can agree? Because at least in the Senate, they're not anywhere near one another.
Right. I should probably start by thanking Senator Alexander for his vote of support. Look, this is a different year, a different Congress than the last Congress. A number of important things have happened. Most important, I think, is the fact that now 37 states and the District of Columbia have asked for and received the administration's temporary conditional waivers. And I know, speaking as a Minnesotan and having talked to the stakeholders in Minnesota, that Minnesota, as well as many of these other states who have the waiver, are now asking the question, what do we do with this? Because they're unsure about going down the steps that they were required to agree to in order to get the conditional waiver, if then the law changes and negates what they've been doing on the conditional waiver. So I think that the clamor coming from states and from the education establishment to change the law, it will be very helpful right now. Because what happened last Congress was that states were feeling almost in extremis as they were quickly realizing that their schools were going to be failing to make AYP, adequate yearly progress. And so they turned their attention from pressing for change in the law to how do we get one of these waivers. They got the waiver. They're not really happy with it. They appreciate the fact that they may not have to make these AYP goals that are out there, but they want the law changed. And I firmly believe that Senator Harkin and Senator Alexander and my colleague in the House, George Miller, and I all want to change the law. So we're starting in different places. I fully expect our bill to go through committee and then to go through the floor and be passed on the House in July. And I'm hoping that that will keep pushing a little bit the Senate to pass something. If they can pass some legislation in the Senate, then we have an opportunity to come together in conference and start to hammer this out.
And how much does your bill leave to the states? I mean, you've been a local control guy for as long as I've known you. So
yes, I have.
If you just want to give us a quick description of how it changes.
It leaves an awful lot to the states. It gets rid of that AYP that we were talking about. It tells the states they have to develop their own standards and their own accountability system. It does, however, still insist that the state systems have to test the students in reading and math through the 8th grade and once in high school. It doesn't change from current law. It does say that, different from the bill that we had last time, that you've got to assess in science in grades 3 to 5, 6 to 9 in high school, I think is the 3-year breakout. So, and it does say that you have to report and break that report down so that it's disaggregated data, like No Child Left Behind. Republicans and Democrats, teachers and principals, almost everybody have agreed that that's one of the really good things that came out of No Child Left Behind. So you can't mask by going to a suburban school, for example, that's achieving 94, 95% numbers, 5% numbers, but you have certain elements that are constantly being left behind, which was the genesis of that bill. So we still insist on that. We insist in our bill that the states develop a teacher performance evaluation system that is at least in part tied to student achievement. We also insist that they include teachers and other stakeholders in the development of that, because we think it's important that we get away from that highly qualified teacher metric that was in No Child Left Behind, that just evaluated teachers based on how many degrees they had and had nothing to do with their performance in the classroom. So we keep some requirements, federal requirements, but vast majority of what we're trying to do, because we wanted to reduce that federal footprint and we wanted to restore local control. And we wanted to support these effective teachers, as well as giving some more power to parents. And those were our 4 principles that we were trying to get out. We believe we've got it in that bill.
So under this, with increased control towards states, states obviously would be able to come up with different recommendations for themselves, and traditionally there have been some states that have been very, very high achieving and some states that haven't been. Mm-hmm. Under your legislation, could you guarantee that a high school student in Mississippi would be just as prepared for college as they would be in Massachusetts?
And these will have to be your final thoughts, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. You can't guarantee that under current law or any law that I can imagine being designed. We do keep NAEP, the National Assessment Program in there so that people can make those sorts of comparisons. So if schools are not performing as well as in one state as another, the parents are going to be able to see that. The parents are going to be able to see these report cards. The parents are going to see disaggregated data, and are the superintendents and the state chiefs. So I think that No Child Left Behind, while AYP is sort of universally disdained right now, it did do some important things in raising awareness and making sure that states are going to step up and make sure their kids are competitive.
Chairman John Kline, thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we're back with our reporters, Fawn Johnson of National Journal and Derek Wellbank of Bloomberg News. Fawn, let me begin with you. The Chairman Kline was just talking about student loans. July 1st, they're going to go up. But what student loans are going up on July 1st? Because there's several different types of student loans.
And the thing is, this is a more complicated issue than it has become in the political dialogue. But essentially, you have two different kinds of loans for undergraduate students. The need-based student loans, these are the ones that are based on your family's income, are at a rate of 3.4% now, and on July 1st, those rates will double to 6.8%. The non-need-based loans will stay the same, and as Chairman Kline was saying, a lot of students, I think it's more than half, have a combination of both. So in some ways, it's kind of a wash. It's also important to remember that these are new loans we're talking about, not loans that you or I are still paying off. And but a lot of students re-up their loans at this time of year, so this is why it becomes so prescient.
So, Derek Wellbank, what are the prospects that they act before July 1st?
Well, we got 2 weeks left until they clean out of town to go on the July 4th recess. So that's really the window that we're talking here. The difficulty that we have is that this Congress and the last one have been very, very willing to go right up to the deadline, sometimes sneak a little bit over, and sometimes live with the consequences. I mean, we all remember that the sequester was supposed to be this horrible, horrible thing that we never wanted to do ever, ever, ever. And then it happened, and we've still got it.
So is that a reality that they could
it's entirely
let it happen?
possible.
And actually, I mean, one thing, just to put this in perspective, even the students who take out the maximum amount of need-based loans for 4 years of college, the amount that they would wind up paying extra is something along the lines of $1,000 in extra costs over a 10-year period. So it's not like it's like it's life-changing money. I mean, it is life-changing if you don't have a job when you graduate, but it's it's a minor thing.
So what are we talking about here then? Because
politics.
It seems right. Okay, so let's talk about the politics of it. But are they really that far apart, Democrats and Republicans, on this issue?
Well, it depends which Democrats we're talking about. If it's the White House and Republicans, we're on sort of the difference of interest rates and how the program would be carried out. They're both talking about tying it to Treasury rates, which is a market-based thing that hasn't been in this program. As it's currently constituted. Senate Democrats are saying, let's just extend this for 2 years, and then we can talk about how we might want to do it later. But then that was also the conversation last year when they said, let's extend it for 1 year, and then we can talk about it. And here we are again. So it's going to come down, I think, to if there's a compromise to be had. Kline seemed very clear to say that it's between what the House Republicans have done and what the White House originally proposed. And there lies the borders, or the borders of a compromise. And if we can find something in there, then maybe we've got a chance.
Well, and he said the president needs to get involved. Any indication that the president is going to get involved on this issue?
I haven't seen it yet, but keep in mind we are not all the way down to the ticking clock yet. I mean, the White House got involved by issuing a veto threat against the House bill, which I was frankly very shocked at, because honestly, I feel like if the president and Mr. Kline were sitting down, they could work out their differences on this notepad right here. So that was a little bit strange to me. We'll see.
So in our remaining seconds here, No Child Left Behind, what are they doing on this legislation, the reauthorization of it?
Well, what they're trying to do is they're trying to update this law that was passed in 2001. It's a long time, and they're trying to put in place a new way for schools to operate, because it's essentially a Band-Aid approach right now. No Child Left Behind had benchmarks that people couldn't meet, so now we've got waivers that some states have and some states don't. Both the House and the Senate are working on it. As we noted, they're very far apart, but I think the hope is, at least on the House side, that they can have a similar idea that they do with the student loans, which is pass something and then wait for the Senate to act and see if they can come together. But it won't happen this year, I don't think. I think it'll probably scoot into next year. But you never know. I mean, it's not as controversial as it used to be. Almost everyone agrees that No Child Left Behind needs to be updated.
All right. Fawn Johnson, Derek Welbing, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.